Welcome to episode 2 of No Chicanery. I'm excited to have my esteemed attorney, Jackie Jones, Chester's finest, serving to maintain the law, preserve law and order, distribute information, save lives.
Hello, everyone. So glad to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. So I have to tell you, just loosen up. This is not too tight.
Okay.
So I decided to bring this to the forefront because there are so many people who are victim of having their children being weaponized against them. And when I mean weaponized, I mean there are people who unlawfully and immorally abuse agencies and abuse their access to children to foster negative consequences against people. So for instance, they utilize the ignorance of the law to abuse them to, take advantage in some way. And they bring the kids into it. They bring judges into it. And like, you better do what I say or else I'll go to the court. And I want people to understand it's not as cut and dry. Please demystify this misunderstanding that women just legally get children. I hear men say this all the time, and I'm like, that is just not true. I think a lot of there are men out there who are maybe unfamiliar with the process. They are not prone, or they may not be the primary caretaker. But can you explain to them that they have rights? Just please.
Yeah. Today I actually did 2 custody cases in 2 different counties, one in person, one virtual, with fathers who are fighting to have a more equitable arrangement with their children.
Wow.
And the thing that's funny about it is because the law, and in most states, and I'm going to speak for Pennsylvania. Here's my disclaimer.
Okay.
I am an attorney in Pennsylvania.
Yes.
And in the era of Gorilla Glue and cat lawyer, I think I have to give, I just have to say that this is not forming an attorney-client relationship, and I'm talking about law in general, but I use Pennsylvania as specific examples. So the general idea of around the country is the best interest of the child. You want what's in the child's best interest. That is how the court is supposed to determine it. And states, they have different versions of how they get to that. So we had these 16 factors you use in Pennsylvania around the whole Commonwealth. But the thing is that generally speaking, parents have equal rights to their children.
What?
So if we were right. So if we were an intact family and we were raising kids in a normal way, we break up, the presumption should be that we share custody, both legal and physical custody. But what happens is that sometimes, people think, okay, the kids stay with the mom. Or sometimes, everyone's not always the best parent when they're in the marriage. People get these ways of doing things. You're like, well, you do all of this and I do all that. But obviously, when you are no longer the same household, you both have to know how to do all the things. And that's where a lot of the fighting comes in. A lot of the fighting comes in because when we were together, I took care of all of this. And now you want to take my kids from me and you didn't do X, Y, and Z before. So it starts off contentious because people already don't understand the premise that we're equal. And then they want to relitigate and relive what broke up their relationship.
Can I tell you a very interesting story? I have a friend, I won't say that name, but her co-parent literally continued to take her back and forth to court just because I'm going to make sure you take off of work. I'm going to make sure you lose money, as if it's not impacting the child directly, that they're losing money, they're losing time from work, which could compromise their position. And people do this. And I just want to, I have some serious questions that were given to me. I literally did a whole poll with several people.
Okay.
I am so excited. I am so honored that you are here to demystify a lot of the discrepancies and misinformation. And what's the legal word? The conjecture.
Ooh, that's a good word.
So the first thing, we're talking about defining weaponizing children. So I did a little research about the whole parental alienation syndrome. And
oh, you went deep.
I did. And I looked into Dr. Richard Gardner's case study that was reviewed. And he said, according to him, allegedly at that time, well, it was peer reviewed at that time, more than 90% of women were guilty of alienating the co-parents, typically fathers, from said children. He later did a retraction, came back, and I'm going to make sure to share those citations later. He made a retraction and stated, okay, it's more like a little more than half. It's not quite 90%. This idea that, you know, women just automatically have rights when at one time the fathers were generally the primary caretakers and the courts were in favor of them. Not that it was a legal standing. Am I correct here?
So in the earlier centuries, 1800s and other, it was assumed that if a woman was a divorcee, she was a poor moral character, because what kind of woman was so. And you know, men take care of the kids because they financially provide for them. So what good is this woman who's divorced and can't care for her kids, can't pay for them? However, once divorce became more common and we had gone through this whole, you know, mythical Camelot phase where women didn't work and they stayed home and took care of the kids and they were the primary caregivers and dads just provide the money, that started to change. So as we got into the late 90s and into the 2000s, where it became clear that both parents could co-equally parent, the presumption started to change. But people's attitudes didn't. Like, I remember years ago, I had someone, their kids were teenagers, so they have to be in their late 20s at this point, because it was at least a decade, 15 years ago, right? And I remember him saying, listen, the girls are calling me all the time, like their mom's out all the time. They're calling me after school. They don't have food. I have to bring them food. I keep them with me for hours and I have to take them back at night with her. And you think if we go to court, I can just get like partial custody? And I was like, partial, right? Partial.
That's crazy.
Like, you should get primary. She should be the one getting those visits. She doesn't want to spend time with the kids. It blew his mind. He was like, can I do that? Now, fast forward, I have a guy today who has a baby, like 11-month-old, and he was just like, I want my daughter. Like I told the judge that, I said, listen, because, you know, they started off talking about the relationship and it was clear there was a lot of contention and, you know, did he cheat? No, I didn't. So, you know, I think that the hearing officer was really just trying to get a feel for the level of conflict to know how much I can work with these two people.
Got it.
And I said, listen, you know, I don't like people calling me all the time. And this guy calls me all the time. But I let it go because he loves his child that much. Like, I know that he's doing this out of genuine love and concern for his child. So I'm just telling you, he needs that extra day because he can't take this, give him this extra day that he's asking for.
Exactly.
But what really it is that women, because we've been in a later period where people assume that women had the right to children, most men don't even question it. They just assume.
Boggles my mind. The leaders of the patriarchy are not questioning women in these issues?
Not when it comes to kids, because as far as the patriarchy is concerned, the children belong to the women. So
can we dispel this narrative today?
Let me tell you though, now let the woman be a raging drug addict, for instance, and some of those instances the men will say, oh no, okay, I have the kids. But even in some of those instances, I'm like, how did your kids end up in foster care? Why are we fighting NCYS? Because why did mom have them when you knew she had this problem, or she had this you know, mental health issue, or you knew she had these, you know, these addictions, and they were like, well, you know, she's their mom. I thought that she just no thought.
Wow. Okay, so
but I want to challenge that concept of parental alienation too, and this is why. It's not just men who have the misconception.
That's true.
Women do too. So there are women who think that because of the woman, they're responsible and this is their child. So sometimes we go to court and I say, well, listen, you know, dad, well, he can't have Friday nights.
Oh, so the presumption.
Right, why? Because it's my child. And, you know, when women are like that, I usually let them talk, because at some point the judge, the hearing officer, or whatever will go, your child, you know, and they'll try to question them sometimes gently, because I said so, because that's my child. Those are great cases because I usually can win those pretty easily because I'm like, there's a high level of conflict here. She doesn't even understand that this is not only her child. So you're going to have to give dad more custody, and you're not going to let mom make a decision because her decision will never let this dad have a relationship.
I've even seen it go so far when an unjustifiable situation where the mothers petition for full custody, they groom their children to lying to the authorities, to unfairly, you know, go against the co-parent.
Yep.
And I'm just like, or threaten to contact, you know, Child Protective Services, creating trumped up cases, trumped up charges. You know, could you speak to like maybe your experience or the legal implication of that behavior?
This is particularly difficult in cases with African American men.
Okay.
Because the weight of the criminal justice system and the legal system against Black people is so harsh that, you know, I have lots of male clients of different races. You can tell my white male clients I'm going to call the police, and you know, yes, some of them are still concerned about it. But
right.
You know, your 48-year-old father who's worked at you know, who has a good job at Boeing or someplace like that, and you have a house and you've never had any problem with the law, and she says, I'm calling the police and I'm going to tell them you did this, you're not as concerned as if you're a 26-year-old Black guy who's, you know, had a couple of run-ins with the law or is a little afraid of what's going to happen if I'm arrested because I have a really good job and I don't want to risk losing it if they take this the wrong way. So right. I actually have more, especially younger, but, you know, in that 20 to 35 range or so, Black men who are terrified when they are threatened with the possibility of false charges. They're terrified.
Can we unpack that a little further? This was absolutely, this particular episode was for many of African-American men, my Black brothers out there who are dealing with this very issue. The fear of, well, I have a criminal record, or the fear of the court system, the fear of law enforcement, which prohibits them, preventing them from even wanting to entertain a court or a judge, period. Because to them, it's translating to maybe I might get locked up. Maybe something unrelated to this particular case could cause me to have a bench warrant of some sort.
There is that. But then there's some other things that I need to be fair about, which are that men don't protect their custodial rights with the same ferociousness that women do.
Yes. So
you could take my child away from me overnight, and I could say the child's supposed to come back on Sunday,
right,
at 6:00. At 6:01, where are you at? At 7:00, look, you better get the baby here. I'm calling the police. Okay. If Monday rolls in and I don't have my child, these women are at the courthouse getting their emergency petition and saying, here's his number. Here's where his mama live. There's a tracking device in the baby's, you know, in the baby's bottle. Here's where they are. You know, let's go.
Okay.
I have men who have not seen their children for periods of months, years, and it's stuff like,
and
well,
they don't
she didn't let me.
It?
Well, you know, well, what happened? Well, I was this, and I'm trying to say, well, I need to understand why we're going to court right now, where you're saying I want custody of my child, I want this kind of thing, but you let this go on and on and on. I remember one time where he had let it go on. She had moved and she had done this and whatever. And I remember we were in the courtroom with the judge. It was just the lawyers and the child, and because they were doing an interview with the child, so they don't have the parents in the room. And I remember that little kid crying and saying, why does my dad want me now? Like, why is he trying to do this now? And he said, and I said, well, you know, he's been wanting to spend with you. You guys had moved, and like, she did some dirty stuff. She moved, she took the child out of school, put him a whole new school district.
Without his consent, permission, or knowledge.
Of course. None, all of that. But let's be clear. I mean, this is not like she moved from New York to California. I mean, she moved to a different town in the same county. Like, let's be realistic. But yes, but she did move. But he said, my grandmother lives in the same place. He knows how to get a hold of my grandmother. Why didn't he look for me? Like, why did he try harder? And that child, and I remember the judge was like, you know what, he's trying now. He's paid this lawyer. He's fighting for you. If I tell you to give him a chance, would you give him a chance? Would you go to therapy with him? Would you talk? And I remember them really taking the time to help this boy.
Right.
But the thing is that I don't know any mothers in my practice who would have let it go that long.
Well,
I've never had a mother let it go as long as I've had some of these men let it go.
So I have maybe not 1,000. I have a few questions for you. Attorney, Counselor, here we're going to start. Question 1. May I acquire custody of my child as a single and unmarried primary co-parent?
So I don't even understand what that question means, right? Because I'm like, somebody has custody. Generally speaking, somebody just has custody. Even if you don't have a custody order,
really?
Who the child lives with is de facto considered the custodial parent, right? They have primary custody. So, and let's face it, many people are single when they have the children nowadays. So it's not like, it's not like I was married, I'm divorced. It's not like I have to be married or the married person has a better chance. Both of y'all were single when this child was born. So, and somebody has to keep the child. So generally speaking, yes.
So that's
that has nothing to prevent you having a child. Yeah.
Because I hear that some people, they say they had their child, they didn't have a formal custody order. However, they will say the courts.
You see my dog trying to get in on this.
Hey, puppy. Hey, who has custody of the dog?
Me. It's always me.
Okay, well then there's that. But when I think of some of the cases I'm hearing about, they will go to court and hey, you can't take this child out because the state has custody of the child. But so what you're saying is that's not entirely true?
Oh, states have no rights to your child. You have your children. Now, what this means though, this is the difference. You don't have the right to deprive the other parent of their custodial rights without getting permission. So you should definitely, if you're like, I'm moving, I want to go somewhere else, you should definitely like let the, go in court and try to get permission. But if the other person knows or isn't involved or whatever, you do what you want.
Okay.
And in fact, I tell people this a lot. A lot of women will come in. He hasn't seen the child in 4 years. He doesn't have paid child support. And she's talking about, well, I want to move. Okay, you have his address? No, he doesn't call. He doesn't write. He changed his phone number. He's afraid I'm going to come out to support. Well, go ahead and move. I mean, go ahead. Now, it's different if you have an active co-parent. But people are out here spending good money that they could be spending on to take care of their child, getting court orders to involve someone who has never shown any desire to be involved. And that's a mistake.
Okay.
Now, I tell people that, but a lot of attorneys don't. Oh, sure, I'll file it. And I'll tell people, listen, man, I can file this for you. I can 100% file it. I can go to court. We can get an order. But let's be very clear. You could just do this right now. You're not in violation of anything. There is no custody order, and he has not seen the child in 4 years.
Okay. Well, then here's the next question. There are people who are afraid, particularly men. They said, if I have a criminal record, am I eligible for custody, to apply for custody?
Are you eligible to have babies? I mean,
I think that's a yes.
Okay, so here's and these are the funniest ones. Some of the funniest ones are we go into court and he's, a lot of times it's drug dealers because he made money and now he's out and he's working a good job. He's working a regular job. I'm doing labor work, or now I'm truck driver. So he's not making fast money, but he's making honest money. Right. But she's not getting the checks like she used to or whatever. So I go in. And it's amazing the stuff these women will say. He's this, he's that. Okay, listen, we tell your record, we're getting there. We have to fill out a form. We know what the record is.
So these women are trying to expose the previous criminality of said co-parent.
But what I am so amused by, and some of these, we have one hearing officer who was a former district attorney. He said, listen, ma'am, I'm a former district attorney. I know, I did it for 14 years. So I know what this charge means, this and that. But he said, but was he all these things when you were with him? When you had the baby with him, was he doing that? Was he selling drugs?
You better tell it.
A lot of these women are fine with him doing that and living the life, and while she's getting the cash. But once she's not getting that money anymore, now all of a sudden it's a problem. But now here's the truth. I will say this though: there are some people where having the baby changes them. Like we were both acting a fool, but I grew up and we had the child and you didn't.
Okay.
Those are harder cases to deal with because, I knew who you were, you knew who I was, but I stopped partying every night because we had a baby and you didn't. And those are legitimate concerns. Like you were still doing the same reckless behaviors that we did when we didn't have a child, and now we have a child and we have to grow up. So that can be a legitimate thing. But just because someone had a criminal record,
wow.
And you knew they had a criminal record?
So that has no bearing on their ability to gain custody?
Some bearing, not saying no bearing, but some bearing, you're not going to be restricted from ever seeing and spending time with your child because you have a prior criminal record. But there are certain things that we actually look for. So there's a form that we fill out in Pennsylvania now, every time you go in, and they're looking for specific things. Have you done any crimes involving children?
Okay.
Have you ever been convicted or accused of abuse of child? Have you had children youth services or DHS, one of those sort of things against you?
Right.
So those are things we look for. We don't want to say you're a child rapist and you're on sex offender probation and that you can just have a child come spend the night with you. No.
That's supervision necessary.
Right.
Okay.
Well, like we're not going to just say here, take the child. But if you were like, I stole something from the T-Mobile store, what's that have to do with whether or not my child can come and, take them to the movies and I can, play with them at their little league game or whatever? That's not going to stop visitation, at least.
So what you're saying is a co-parent has rights to child custody, to the custody of their child or children, regardless of their criminal record, unless there is something relating to the abuse of children, then even they would be either supervised at that point
or denied for certain places.
Or denied.
Certain sorts of things you were not allowed to have contact with children. So I mean, you're a pedophile. We can't, and you're currently on parole. You're not allowed to be around
not me,
children.
y'all. She's giving hypotheticals. Not me.
Hypothetical, okay? But like the other thing is too, you have to remember that your past still matters. So sometimes people come and go, I did this in the past and they don't want to give me, sir, I just got you every other weekend with your child, plus every Wednesday for a dinner visit. I feel like you need to be happy because you just got out of jail 6 weeks ago. Like, come on. It's not that it means you can't spend time with your kids, but you have to understand it is going to possibly limit interactions. It's going to make the court want to, watch you a little bit.
So here's my other question. What if I am I believe to be the biological co-parent of a child. Oh, we're getting real saucy with it. My name is not on the birth certificate. I'm going to line up my own timeline for my assumption. How can I enforce that possibility to test to see if that's my child and for me to be in that child's right? Because there are women out there who will have a baby knowing there's a possibility that is with the one person. They will go and have an entire new relationship with someone else and just deny the existence of the other person who may be a biological co-parent to said child, and they will have the other person write that name on that child's birth certificate. What can they do?
I'm gonna call it Usher. Make you want to leave the one you're with.
That's a whole entanglement and confessions and all of that.
These are my confessions. So the thing is, they do it. There is a process. Okay. So this is the thing that's funny. Even though technically there's custody court, which is where you deal with custody.
Yes.
Technically speaking, if you want to challenge paternity, you want to do a petition to open paternity, you do that in domestic relations court. That's support court.
Oh, okay. So that's a whole separate court.
I have done, it's in the same court system, but yes, it's a different place you file it. I've done a lot of these, but I've also done it from the side of people who were discovering they're not the dad after a while. So I did this so much. We have a paralegal there, and I would walk in to court, and she said, "Okay, Jacquie, who's not the dad today?"
Wow, you know what? So many situations like that.
I was always right. When I said he wasn't dad, I was like, "This one's going."
They needed to hire you on, Maureen.
I know.
So my question about that: what if a man assumes the paternity of a child that turns out not to be their child, but they signed the birth certificate? They've been in the child's life for however long, and now they find out, let's say 3 years later, oh my goodness, this is not my kid.
Does he want to still be the father or not? That's question number one.
So let's say that person does not. Maybe the child is Chucky.
Okay, so he does not want to be Chucky's father. Right. And how does he find out that he's not the father?
You know what? Let's say someone did a CVS DNA paternity test, because they have been doing that. I know somebody that did that.
That happened to one of mine.
What?
The girlfriend did it. She acted like she was on Ancestry.com, snuck, did it. But the thing about it was, when he confronted the mother, she disappeared.
With the child?
No, she left him the child. She knew it wasn't his baby.
But she said, here you go, bye. Like, that's what she did. Oh, this is, you know what? This is why it's important. I speak about accountability so vehemently and strong.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we do point a lot of fingers at men.
Right.
And a lot of us as women, we have to take accountability for things that we do. If you know there is a possibility that it could be another person, just say that so that your child is not confused. You're not confused. The person isn't confused. It's just deceptive and duplicitous.
And your kids don't end up marrying their siblings someday. Okay.
Okay.
So I'm going to tell you. So what happens in those situations is, I asked a question about like, how did he find out? Because there's something called estoppel. If you have held yourself out, it's a legal principle. If you've held yourself out as father of the child and this child, you're the only child that father knows and all this kind of stuff, you can be stopped from denying paternity. You can be stopped from saying, look, take me out child support, it's not my kid. However, if there is fraud, duress, or material mistake of fact, you have a right to open paternity. So the reason I asked is because, you don't want to claim the child. You like, this is not my child. And, we go in and we say, well, look, Your Honor, here's what happened. They were together. She thought that they were, she told him they were in a monogamous relationship. And
the lies.
Well, this thing, remember, estoppel originally came from marriages. So if someone is married at the time they have a baby, it's presumed to be the spouse's child. It's supposed to be their husband's child.
Okay.
And this all predates same-sex marriage, which is why this is also interesting. Because at that point, spouse was only, the husband. The woman had a child was only the husband. So what happened is that when that happened, this person is assumed to be the father, right?
Wow.
So he now has to go to court and say, I want to open paternity. And by opening paternity, he has to allege that there was fraud or duress or material mistake of fact. They forced me to sign that. Like her father had a shotgun and said, if I don't sign, I'm going to jail. Or there was a fraud. And for the longest time, there's a lot of cases about fraud. Well, I had someone who's close to me who had an issue with this when I was in law school, was finished up law school. So I started doing a lot of research on it. She had told both of them that there was a possibility on the father. She was very young when she got pregnant. She didn't understand how it worked. So she thought the person who I was with the most must be the father.
It only takes that one.
Right. But she was young and she didn't have any really explaining it to her. So, they went on and she assumed that guy was the father. Well, kids started having some issues. She said, look, I just need to know like who the father is really. The presumptive father took the test. It wasn't him. She goes to the other guy. He's like, oh, I'll take a test. It disappears. Now he thinks she wants something. She's like, I just need to know. And the kid needs tutoring. Like all I want is some tutoring for the kid. Right. It was very simple.
Okay.
He disappeared. Now he didn't realize at this point that she had done very well for herself. I guess he thought that she was coming for him because he's now, a doctor or whatever.
Because paternity is a separate court from, the child support.
Here's the thing. It falls under child support court. So he's thinking, if this paternity comes through, she's going to come after me for all my money because she ain't got none, which, by the way, she had enough because she could fight this, and they fought for 10 years. But so that's how I got involved in this stuff as a law student, trying to help her out. Well, the long and short of it was I realized that it's not just fraud and duress, it's material mistake of fact. If we can show that it's a mistake, that this person really is not the father, or this person really is the father, that's the reason for us to open paternity. So I started using that as my thing. I may get a test from CVS or some way and say, we have reason to believe he's not the father. We were lied to, the mom still refuses to admit it. But with this CVS test, there's a reasonable suspicion that we were, defrauded. And so I started using that as the way
to
get
your CVS test. Get that CVS test.
And I'm not advocating for CVS. There are many DNA labs to do this.
Or whomever, whatever drugstore is selling the DNA testing.
There's even some local labs, like I think Any Lab Now was what a lot of my clients were using for a while, that will do them, or do different kinds of tests. Yeah.
I mean, it's so much more accessible today than in yesteryear.
Oh yeah.
The question I have about this, let me see. When you have a custody agreement that's already been through the courts, it's outlined, it's detailed, how does a parent enforce that as I take this sip of water?
Well, let's talk about what do you want to enforce. And this is the other hard part. So I get a lot of parents who want to enforce it because they're not getting all their rights. So a lot of the times it's men who aren't getting as much time, the mother is controlling things. It's
Right.
just the way it is. Because even when I have fathers who have custody, I just don't get as many women saying he's not letting me see the kid. It's really women, which is unfortunate.
That's
So
sad.
a lot of times with those men, I'm fighting to in the courts to make sure for contempt. She's in contempt or court, making sure we get reports, police reports, all that. But I get women calling me, and this one is really odd to me. Sometimes, and it's usually, like I said, women in this one who, not only the women who want full custody, that's a whole other thing we talk about later, but the
Right.
women who say, he's not spending enough time with the child, or he's not doing this. I want to go to court so that we can put on paper what his time is. I said, well, sweetie, does he show up now? No. And when he keeps promising to come, doesn't come, and he doesn't come on time, no. And he brings them back early, and you can't get a full weekend out of him. I said, so what you think the court is going to do when he doesn't come pick the kids up, even after they give him weekend? You think the court's going to force him to come and spend time with his kids?
Outside of the custody arrangement.
I mean, in the custody arrangement, the court is not forcing you to spend time with your kids. So if someone doesn't want to spend time with their kids, the court is not going to say, oh, I'm going to punish you by giving you more time. They're not. The only thing they would do
Ooh,
is take time away from them, which means that if you thought you were getting a break, you're not getting a break because you're going to have to keep them all that time. So, you know,
that's why it's important to
enforcement,
know who
right?
you're having babies with.
Who you have babies, right? And I mean, especially women, I just need you to understand. If he has 4 other baby mamas and those 5 or 6 kids he has with them, and every last one of them, he's talking about how they do him wrong and they keep taking me child support, and I don't, and I don't know why I take care of my kids. What makes you think that you won't be the 5th one in the line? I went to support court one day.
Hmm.
There was a line of women over here on this side. I was representing a guy. And I found out, this made it awful. I found out right before court that one of the women, they had gotten married, him and the woman.
Okay.
She was still a plaintiff from before because they had kids before. So he had 2 other baby mamas there plus her. And I was like, please don't let this come up in court because I'm trying to keep this man from, I mean, this is crazy. I'm representing this fool. And one of the women says, well, I mean, he had enough for that big wedding. Her and him had enough for that big wedding. So the judge is like, who? What do you talk about? She was like, he's married to her, right next to me. And the judge says, ma'am, are you married to him?
And what did they say?
She said, well, yes. He said, well, if you're married to him, you can't be a plaintiff over here with these other plaintiffs. Like that's, we're
So
not
they
going
were
to give you
legally
support.
married but separated?
They were still together. They had gotten married that summer. They had gotten married that summer. So he had clutched the pearl. That's how it went down.
Yeah, I did it like, wait, what? Okay.
Right. And so the judge was like, well, she said, well, but if these 2 other women are getting child support, I don't want all the money going to them and then we not be able to take care of my child in the house.
Wow. I mean, you know what I find
Mm-hmm.
interesting? How people are so afraid. Yeah, you got to sip on that. People are
Mm-hmm.
so afraid. Some people are so
Mm-hmm.
afraid of getting married, but they are not afraid to make babies. And I
At
never
all.
did that. Like, oh, you're just going to have a baby? I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
get locked down in the marriage. You have a baby, like a whole life. Like,
A
what is
whole
that?
life.
A
A whole
whole
life.
life or lives. What is
Many,
it?
many
I
lives.
don't get it.
Many.
I can't get it. I can't.
Over decades.
I
These
can't.
kids.
I can't. So, oh, this is another thing. Now that we're in the non-binary, non-conforming
Mm-hmm.
LGBT relationships,
Mm-hmm.
people who are not, let's say they're not legally married, but they're co-partners, they're step-parents, they're
Mm-hmm.
co-parents to their partner. And I guess could they adopt a child?
Yes, we can do same-sex adoptions.
So
That
they can
is
do same
legal.
sex. Is the process like ridiculously difficult, expensive? Is it anything similar to like a traditional adoption or?
It is. Now that
Okay.
it is same-sex marriages are legal, it can be a step-parent adoption, which are simpler adoptions.
Really?
So if
Okay.
you are legally married and you're the biological parent of this child, now that assumes some things, right? This
Okay.
is assuming, for instance, that you 2 chose to have this child, via whatever means, whatever. Just keep in mind, there is an issue, and this is not one I've gotten to explore yet, which would be really great.
Oh,
let's say mom and dad were married.
Okay.
They get divorced. Mom now marries stepmom.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
Stepmom and mom want to be a nice little nuclear family, and stepmom wants to adopt.
Okay.
Well, they would have to terminate the parental rights of dad to do that, right? Now,
Okay.
here's the problem.
What's the problem?
Do we terminate the parental rights of a dad and give the child no dad?
So is it a matter of the biological concept of dad, mom, child, or is it just
right? We don't know, because all of the case law about, say, step-parent adoptions was about replacing one with the other. And all of the case law about, generally speaking, about same-sex partners is really just about providing two parents in a same-sex relationship, usually when one is already the biological parent via, surrogacy or IVF or something like that. So there is no other parent to worry about.
Wow.
So I think we're going to end up in a situation where there is possibly another parent to worry about, but we still have to figure out, what to do. So I think that'd be an interesting area of the law.
That is new. You know what? I guess you don't really think about it. I mean, or even the guardian can a non-domestic relationship guardian. So let's say, I have a relative who has a child, but the father is not in the picture, and they're essentially a single parent, and they're like, hey, if anything happens to me, I want you to be the guardian. Can they do that without the consent of the co-parent if that person is either not involved, really?
Yes and no. People do it, or people don't do anything. And then when the child is there in a situation where the parent is dead, because it happens a lot, we're like, what do we do? So I've had cases where, there was a lot of contention between the parents.
Okay.
And I remember, some where, in this case, let's say mom died and dad was like, well, the baby's at the child's at the grandparent's house, and I think they're going to fight me. Do I have to file for custody? And I was like, well, pick up your child and just don't take him back. In that case. But I had another person who went and filed for emergency custody. And then, so that meant the grandmother ended up with some kind of temporary custody because the child was there. And then he was back and forth fighting with the grandmother forever, even though ultimately the child will end up with dad. It became a hassle. So
there's so many questions floating through my brain right now.
And sometimes I tell people, go ahead and make your arrangements, but make it clear that your money follows the person that you chose as guardian. Because if that person is such a shiftless waste of space, if they're not getting any money for that child, they may never be a problem. I've also seen other ones where, because like we said, it doesn't even occur to them that, like, oh yeah, I'm the father and I have the rights. I saw one that did recently, mom died. Dad was still getting every other weekend like he did with mom, while the child stayed with like grandmom and the aunt.
Wow. Was that intentional, or?
They had been helping to take care of him. They just kept doing it, and it never occurred to him that he should, because he wasn't raising a child before. He was going every other weekend, and he was fine with that. He didn't have to do homework and, all that kind of, and he didn't necessarily want to do it. So, he didn't necessarily want to do it, and they didn't mind. They wanted to raise, this child.
So here's a crazy scenario. Kidnapping your own child. Kidnapping your own child. How do you kidnap your own child?
Well, I can tell you several examples.
Or you, like, how?
I have one right now. She took the child out of state, and has not let dad see him. So yes, that's a kidnapping.
So if there's no custody order in place.
There was no custody order in place, but she took the child
away.
Took the child, took him out of school, took him away, wouldn't let dad see him, basically tried to move him out of the jurisdiction. The court said, listen, return the child to the jurisdiction. You guys can have a regular custody date and deal with how you're going to do with custody, but you don't just move the child out of state without permission. I've had another one where the child was there for the summer as part of their agreement. Dad was supposed to bring the child back. He decided, well, mom, you need to come pick the child up. I'm not coming. Whatever. Next thing I know, he enrolled the child in school, put his girlfriend's name as if she's his mother, this, kind, and the other. We got an emergency custody petition. We had to figure out what the child was. Every time he talked to the little girl, she would, he would get off the phone before she said anything, but she heard her say something about school. And so since she knew the area he lived in, she went and did a search all the elementary schools with a name similar to that till she found the school.
Okay.
We got an emergency custody petition. We had them send it to the district down in DC. I got on the phone with them. I remember because I was in a whole other court while they're calling me. I'm like, yes, this is the order, do this. She goes and meets the police at the girl's school. They get the girl from the school, and they call the father. Police call the father. By the time father gets there, mom and the girl already down the road back here, and they serve him with the paperwork.
Oh my goodness.
That one was dramatic. I had one where actually it was
That is
local.
something out of Law and Order, but go on.
It was. Another one that was local where I actually, had some relationships with people at school. So I went and arranged for dad and grandmom to go there and pick him up. So they called him to the office. They didn't want it to be during, the time school was changing. And I knew that if mom knew, she would go to school and take him out because she was trying to keep him from having that time. So I sent somebody over to her house while I was there at the school getting the child out, and he served the paperwork. By the time she got it, we had, worked with the principal and got him out of there with dad. It was.
I'm just like, these pearls are gonna be on fire. Mm-hmm. I'm clutching them like, whoo, child. So the thing is, pretty much, you cannot legally remove the child from the jurisdiction without the co-parent knowing whether there's a custody order or not.
Well, remember I said earlier that there's a difference between actively involved parents and people who are just nowhere and doing nothing, right? So if you're an actively involved parent and we have been sharing the child, even if it's just, I get the weekends, whatever, you got to at least let them know you're planning on doing something, right?
You know what's crazy? Some co-parents go so far because like the savagery of pettiness is becoming a thing, right?
It is. Mm-hmm.
Friends of mine, I'm like, it'd be cool to take my kid to, I don't know, let's take my kid to Africa to see Africa. Right. And they said, oh, I got to apply for a passport. Co-parent will not sign. What can they do?
Sign. Let me tell you, I had to go to court in the passport, and this woman still wasn't signing. I finally had one where the judge ordered it, and went and they got it done. I'm telling you, and not just going to Africa on vacation. The grandparents live in Africa. These are African immigrants.
I see.
She would not let her child go see his grandparents. Then this one was even so bad during the pandemic. His wife had gone to Africa with the other kids because this one could never get a passport. And they were stuck there during the pandemic. Okay. So he wasn't seeing his siblings, his stepmother, his grandparents. He couldn't see. She was still trying to get this problem. That's just like, you're getting this passport. Cool. I had another one where the father actually came into town from Africa. He's a high-level official. We got a schedule from his attaché and all this, whatever. She was not trying to let him dad have extra time just so that the kid could spend time with the grandfather. So we finally got to the point where this is the one I think that made me most upset about it. My client's grandmother, she was the child's great grandmother, and she was older. She had gone back to Africa, and so the child hadn't seen her for almost a year. So she was coming over to Paris to visit his cousins. He said, let's get the passports so we can fly to Paris for the weekend.
Okay. For the weekend, they got money. Okay, go on.
She refused to allow it and was like, what kind of who flies to Paris for a weekend? They do. And my child would too. If this is the kind of money they had, my child would be flying to Paris for weekends. I mean, what? And to see her great grandmother. I mean, it was ridiculous. It was, it should have happened. It shouldn't have been a problem.
So my question is, people can't just use the law. People can't just use the law to abuse their position in parenthood, but they try because the ignorance of the co-parent may be being unaware of what those rights are.
It's not as simple as that. I mean, there are some people who understand it and use it as a weapon because the other person is ignorant. But it's just a matter of people, one, really wanting what they want. I want what I want. But a lot of people really with the false belief that they have the right to control things. And it's usually, I'm the mother. I'm the mother. That's why I have a right to, you can't tell me what to do my child, as if he was not there in the creation of this child. That is usually where the biggest problems come in. When you hear people in court and they keep saying stuff like my child, you know it's gonna be an issue.
It's gonna be off the seat of wizard.
Our child, right? Exactly. If people say our child, it's like, okay, they're thinking this is our in terms of us. But if you hear a lot of my child, you know something's gonna happen.
I mean, you cannot possess children. You don't own children. You cannot morally and ethically alienate an able-bodied parent?
Look, listen, when you have
How?
seen some of these women yelling at the judges or the hearing officers, well, because I said so, because it's my child. No, I'm not going to allow that.
You know, I think a
Okay.
lot of this comes from, that is their power. That's their only
Hmm.
power. And they feel as though I'm emboldened by my right, by my position, and I now will use this to thrash you down, sir, sir, ma'am, sir.
Listen, so, and I'm going to say there are definitely those, but here's the thing, and this is what I learned by doing a lot of this. There are
Okay.
also the ones that it's not just their power, it's their heart.
Mm,
Okay. And we have to remember that for most of us, our children are our heart.
right.
And so when we have experienced pain and hurt at the hands of this person,
Hmm.
and then our children may have experienced pain or hurt, or we're trying to prevent them from experiencing pain or hurt at the hands of this person, you have to understand that sometimes what seems unreasonable is really a reaction to behavior that they've already experienced from this person, and they're trying to protect their child. So
Got it.
I just try to be real clear about what that is.
I see. I mean, you've answered and demystified a lot of things. I see so many
Hmm.
people, women getting, co-parents locked up, vice versa. People going
Hmm.
to prison, people losing their livelihood, people missing out on just being around the child. What is your advice for someone who may not understand the law, but is a parent, but maybe
Hmm.
not recognized by the system as that parent? What do you suggest for them?
Don't wait.
Hmm.
You have to do everything sooner rather than later. If you wait to establish your rights as a parent, you may lose them. The longer you wait, the more likely you are to lose that connection. So I would just say that if you think a child is yours, go to a lawyer and see what you can do first. If someone has had your child for a while and they're fighting you over it, go to a lawyer, see what you can do first. Most of the things that are really hard for us to fix are when you wait so long that it now is like, yeah, this is kind of impossible at this point. Now it's hard because you slept on your rights for too long. So if the minute you feel like something is wrong, instead of thinking I can never afford a lawyer because it's going to cost me $10,000, go and find out, because I can guarantee you it's cheaper in the beginning when I just need to fix the little thing than it is when I need to untangle the mess that you've created or let thrive for a long time. I've
Okay.
had people who end up losing not just custody, but maybe even all legal rights to their child because they stayed away so long that somebody else stepped in, and now the court said you've lost this right. This child doesn't know you. You don't have any rights to the parent.
That's wow. I mean, and let's go over a couple of the custody options. So I
Mm-hmm.
looked, there's like legal custody, physical custody, joint, sole, and grandparent visitation custody. Could you just break down those things?
So, legal custody is the concept of who has the rights to make legal decisions. That's things like schooling,
Okay.
health care, and religion. Those are the basic things, right? So, generally speaking, parents have joint legal custody. We both decide where the child should go to school. We both decide if the child needs an operation. That's why you ever want to go get your child signed up for therapy and the therapist is like, you need the other parent to sign. That's
Ooh,
why, right?
well,
Um, so that's legal custody. The other is physical custody. Physical custody is where the child spends the night, where they're at.
mhm.
That can
Primarily or
be,
just in general?
well, that's just the term of physical custody.
Okay.
So that can be someone can have primary physical custody, which means the child spends most of their time living with that person. Partial physical custody, there's part of the time where someone is there. There can be a joint physical custody, which means you equally split it 50-50, which is a little more rare because it's kind of hard to split exactly 7 days, right, a week. So,
Right.
but it's possible. And that really is more the de facto, is that we hope that parents get to a joint custody where they're splitting it equally, and if it's in the best interest of the child.
Wait, I just got a text message not too long ago. I want to make sure I answer that. Or you answer that rather. You're the specialist. Um, the parent had a child. A parent
Hmm.
had a child during the marriage that was
Hmm.
not the biological child of the father. Father did not know, signed the birth certificate, and they were legally married. is he legally responsible for said child and they are still married?
Yes.
Ooh, in the state of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, in most places, because the key word you just said is and they're still married. So here's the thing.
And you're still, yes.
when I talked about paternity by estoppel earlier, I mentioned the idea that the spouse of the woman who gives birth, usually the husband of the one who gives birth, is presumed to be the father. He's the presumptive father. So he's already legally the father. So like, let's say you're married and you break up with your spouse, but you're still legally married. Your husband is still presumed to be father, which is why you have to do something where you have a different person sign the birth certificate, you do all this stuff. Now, here's the deal. For a while, if I had a baby with somebody and she stayed with her husband, I would have no option because, under that, because I wouldn't be able to do it because he's the presumptive father. That's where estoppel came in, where we found other ways to open paternity. But what would have to happen here, the reason we do that is because we don't want to destroy an intact family. So it's a fight. It's a fight if there's an intact family to take out that. So the only way this would really work, since they're an intact family, is if the husband, for instance, would say, okay, I agree that I am not the father of this child. And husband and wife, they go and go to just paternity court or whatever and have the person who's actually father added on, change all that kind of stuff and, open the paternity and do that. But if you're in an intact family, generally speaking, a man could say, this is my child, this is my wife, and someone would have to fight really, really hard if he were on the other side to try to get access to his own child.
My mind is blown. Why are paternity tests not automatic at birth? Why?
At this point, it seems like it should be, right?
I mean, that should be part of the, you slap the baby, swab the baby's mouth, swab mom's mouth, swab dad's mouth. Let's get this thing going. Why are we not doing this?
Yeah.
Too much like right.
Too much
like right. So just so I'm clear, we're going to wrap it up in a few minutes, but just so I'm clear, there is no precedent stating that one parent has more right than the other.
That is very clear. There is no precedent. It is about the best interest of the child, and we presume, with no other evidence, the best interest is for parents to share.
Okay. So, gentlemen, this was for you. Ladies, this also is for you. Please do not allow your ignorance to cause you to be abused by someone weaponizing their knowledge or their assuming your ignorance to take your child away or to take your rights away or to, it's just so crazy. My mind is blown. I appreciate you so much. Any additional advice you have? I know you said start early with the process of establishing custody.
Start early, absolutely. But also give one another grace. Your children have you. You chose these people. Whether you like them now or hate them, you chose these people. And your children are going to want to love their parent. You have to find a way to co-parent. You have to find a way to not always be right, but sometimes give the other person grace. And if you can't do that, find a way to step back and let them have the relationship without your involvement as much as possible. Just so that child can have a good relationship and not feel your negativity.
Oh, that's great advice. One last question. What would cause a custody order issue what would cause someone to go to jail for custody?
If you are severely in contempt of a custody order. So for instance, like I was saying earlier, she took the child to New York. The judge said, bring this child back because otherwise I'm going to activate law enforcement, for a custodial interference or this kind of thing. If you take a child and you're not supposed, like the court order says, don't take this child, and you take this child somewhere, especially out of state, people have gone to jail for taking their own children out of state when there's a custody order.
That is correct. Do they need to have written consent in order to do so, or verbal
consent? Not that you have to have written consent. Like, I can go to Florida. I mean, we may argue about it, but I can't move to Florida, take the kids out of school, put them in there and refuse to bring them back and not let me have my custodial time. That's the difference, right? I can, I may get a slap on the wrist if I take an unscheduled vacation or someone else's time. I could actually get arrested if I move out of state and don't let my kids have contact with their other parent.
Okay. Well, I'm going to tell you, this was great knowledge. I want to thank you, Attorney Jacquie Jones, Thank you so much. I'm clapping for you. Yay. Hold on, let me get the clapper. I actually have a legitimate clapper.
Okay, clap.
Yes, thank you so much for lending your expertise, your experience, and your professionalism, knowledge, wealth of knowledge. And I hope this helps someone today. Thank you so much for joining us on episode 2 of No Chicanery. And for more information, I will leave your website